Hello and welcome. The day has gone, but the night has only begun. It's time to quiet the mind and soothe the soul. Let these peaceful images and the promise of renewal carry you into a deep and restful sleep. Breathe in and out. Let's begin. The Scribe of Atheria, a Psalm for Rest. Section 1 of 30. The last of the daylight, a liquid gold that tasted of honey and late-blooming sage, poured through the high, arched window of the scriptorium. It fell in a wide, warm pool across the worn oak table where Elara worked, illuminating the vellum before her and setting the particles of dust dancing in a slow, graceful waltz. Her hand, stained with the faintest blue shadow of ink near the nail of her smallest finger, moved with a practiced, unhurried rhythm. The quill, a goose feather from old Corvus the gander, whispered a soft, rhythmic scratch against the page. This was the only music in the quiet room, a sound so familiar it had become part of the silence itself. She was illuminating the word peace. It was for a new copy of the Psalms, commissioned by the village elders for the small chapel that stood at the heart of Atheria. The initial letter P was to be a great, curling vine, from which would sprout leaves of silver and flowers of a deep, celestial blue. But now, she was only laying down the base outline, a skeleton of the beauty to come. Her world had shrunk to the point of her quill, the flow of the ink, the subtle grain of the vellum. Outside, the world was preparing for its nightly surrender. She could hear the distant, melodic calls of the shepherd, Liam, guiding his flock down from the high meadows, the plaintive bleating of the sheep, a comfortable, homely sound. She could hear the blacksmith's hammer fall silent, its final, ringing clang echoing like a bell marking the end of toil. Elara paused, flexing her fingers. A slight ache had begun to bloom in the muscles of her neck, a familiar herald of the day's end. She looked at the word on the page. Pax, peace. It was a simple word, a short word, yet it felt as vast and deep as the sky that was now beginning to blush with the first hints of twilight. What did it truly mean, this peace? Was it merely the absence of the blacksmith's hammer? The cessation of the shepherd's calls? Or was it something more, something that lived and breathed in the spaces between sounds? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the door. Brother Theron, the keeper of the scriptorium, stood there, his form a silhouette against the fading light of the hallway. He was an old man, his back slightly stooped from a lifetime bent over texts, but his eyes held a clarity that belied his years. "The light fades, child," he said, his voice a gentle rumble, like stones smoothing each other in a river. "The finest scribe cannot write in the dark, nor can the most devoted soul find its way without rest." Elara smiled, setting her quill down in its rest. "I was just finishing the outline for Pax, brother." Theron moved into the room, his steps slow and deliberate. He came to stand beside her, looking down at her work. His gnarled finger, tracing a path just above the vellum without touching it, followed the elegant curve of the letter. "A good beginning," he murmured. "Strong, graceful. You have given it a fine foundation. But remember, Elara, the foundation is not the house. The outline is not the piece. The true work, the color and the life, comes later. It must be built upon something solid." He looked from the page to her face, his gaze knowing. "You are thinking too hard about it. I can see the wheels turning in your mind. You are trying to understand peace so you can depict it. But some things are known not by the mind, but by the soul. And the soul learns in the quiet moments, in the laying down of burdens." Elara sighed, a soft exhalation that was not quite frustration, but the acknowledgement of a puzzle. "How do I depict what I cannot fully grasp, brother? I want the word to feel safe. I want anyone who looks upon it to feel the same comfort as lying down in their own bed after a long day." Theron's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Then perhaps you should go and do just that. Lie down. Let the day fall away from you. The verse you will soon write beside this illumination holds the answer you seek. In peace I will lie down and sleep." It is not a declaration of a world without trouble, Elara. It is a declaration of a heart without fear, because it trusts in a safety that is granted, not earned. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Clean your brushes. Put away your inks. The day is done. Let the peace of the evening enter you. Tomorrow the color will come more easily. Nodding, Elara began the methodical ritual of closing her work for the day. She cleaned the nib of her quill with a soft cloth, wiped the edges of her ink pots, and covered the vellum with a sheet of clean linen to protect it from the night dust. As she worked, Brother Theron lit a single small lamp, its flame a tiny, brave star in the gathering gloom of the large room. The action was itself a kind of prayer, an acknowledgement of the darkness but a refusal to be conquered by it. Section 2 of 30. The path from the scriptorium to her cottage was a ribbon of packed earth, worn smooth by generations of feet. It wound between ancient oaks whose leaves whispered secrets to the evening breeze, past the tidy, fenced gardens where the last of the day's light clung to the red globes of tomatoes and the deep purple of eggplants. Elara walked slowly, her pace a conscious mirror of the world's deceleration. Her satchel, containing a small loaf of bread and a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth for her supper, bumped gently against her hip with each step. The sounds of the village were receding, replaced by the night's own symphony. The chirrup of crickets tuning their instruments, the distant hoot of an owl claiming its dominion, the rustle of some small, unseen creature in the undergrowth. She passed Liam the shepherd's cottage. The low, stone building was already shuttered against the night, but a warm, golden light spilled from the cracks around the door and the single window, and the rich, savory scent of a stew simmering over the fire made her stomach gently remind her of its emptiness. She could hear the faint, contented bleating of the sheep in the pen beside the cottage, a sound of utter security. They were home. They were safe. Their shepherd was near. The simplicity of their trust was a palpable thing, a lesson written not on vellum but in the very air. Further on, she saw old Maeve, the weaver, sitting on a bench outside her door, her hands still for once, resting in her lap as she looked up at the first bold stars pricking through the twilight. She nodded to Elara as she passed, a slow, silent communication that needed no words. It was a passing of the peace, an acknowledgement of a shared journey through the day and a shared entry into the rest of the night. Elara nodded back, a soft smile touching her lips. This was the fabric of Atheria, threads of quiet lives woven together into a tapestry of profound and simple contentment. Her own cottage stood a little apart from the main cluster of the village, nestled at the foot of a small, wooded hill. It was a humble place, built of the same gray stone as the scriptorium, with a roof of thick, fragrant thatch. A climbing rose, now heavy with deep crimson blooms, framed the wooden door. This was her sanctuary. As she approached, a sense of anticipation, a gentle release, began to unfold within her. The day, with its focused intensity and its lingering questions, was about to be folded away, like a finished letter placed in an envelope. She unlatched the door and stepped inside. The interior was a single room, dominated by a large fireplace on the far wall. A small, neatly made bed stood in one corner, a wooden table and 2 chairs in another, and shelves held her few, well-tended possessions. A stack of books, a set of simple pottery, a basket of mending. The air was cool and carried the faint, clean scents of dried lavender from the bunches hanging from the rafters and the beeswax she used to polish the wooden surfaces. Her first ritual was to build a fire. Not a large, roaring blaze, but a small, friendly one, just enough to push back the evening's chill and to heat the kettle for a cup of tea. She laid the kindling with practiced ease, struck a spark with her flint and steel, and coaxed the tiny flame into a steady, crackling dance. The firelight immediately began to paint the room in warm, shifting hues of orange and gold, transforming the space from a mere shelter into a home. It created a pocket of light and warmth against the vast, indifferent darkness of the night outside, a tiny echo of the stars now filling the sky. As the kettle began to sing its low, steaming song, she prepared her simple meal. The bread was crusty and hearty, the cheese sharp and creamy. She ate at the small table, listening to the sounds of her cottage. The pop and hiss of the fire, the gentle sigh of the wind against the thatch, the soft, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the mantel. Each sound was a stitch in the quilt of the evening's tranquility. She was not merely eating, she was unwinding. The tension in her neck, the focused furrow in her brow, the slight ache in her fingers. All of it began to soften and dissolve in the gentle atmosphere of her own quiet company. After she had washed her plate and cup, she poured hot water over a bundle of chamomile flowers in a clay mug. The delicate, apple-like scent rose with the steam, a fragrant promise of rest. She carried the mug to her bedside and set it on a small stool to cool. Then, she began the slow, deliberate ritual of preparing for sleep. She changed from her day dress, which carried the faint smells of ink and vellum, into a soft, worn nightgown of linen. She took down her hair, which had been coiled in a simple braid at the nape of her neck, and brushed it out with long, slow strokes, feeling the day's thoughts and minor worries fall away with each pass of the brush. Section 3 of 30. Elara sat on the edge of her bed, the worn wooden frame giving a familiar, comforting creak. She picked up the mug of chamomile tea and cradled it in her hands, feeling its warmth seep into her skin. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing, pulsating embers that painted her face in soft, shifting shades of rose and amber. She took a slow sip of the tea, its gentle, floral taste a liquid lullaby. In this quiet space, with the mantle of the day officially laid aside, her mind, freed from the strict demands of her craft, began to wander back through the hours. She thought of Brother Theron's words. The true work, the color, and the life comes later. It must be built upon something solid. What was the solid thing upon which peace was built? For the sheep in Liam's pen, it was the shepherd himself, his presence, his vigilance, his care. Their peace was entirely derivative, rooted in their trust of another. Was it the same for people? Was her own peace, this quiet feeling that was slowly filling her cottage and her heart, built on something outside of herself? She looked around the room. The solid stone walls kept out the wind. The sturdy door, with its thick wooden bolt, provided a barrier against any physical intrusion. The fire provided warmth and light. These were good things, tangible things that contributed to a feeling of safety. But were they the foundation? She knew, intellectually, that a stronger wind could blow, a more determined force could break the door, the fire could die down to ashes. If her peace depended solely on the impermeability of her walls, it was a fragile peace indeed. Brother Theron had hinted at this. It is a declaration of a heart without fear, because it trusts in a safety that is granted, not earned. Granted, the word lingered in her mind. A gift, something given, not manufactured by her own efforts. Her own work as a scribe was one of meticulous effort and control. Every stroke of the quill, every mix of pigment, was an act of her own will and skill. Peace, it seemed, operated on a different principle. It was not something to be crafted, but something to be received. It was not about building higher walls, but about trusting the one who guarded the gate. She thought of the psalm again, the full verse she was to illuminate. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. The peace and the sleep were a direct result of the safety provided by the Lord. The safety came first. The peace was the natural, flowering consequence. The you alone was the solid foundation Brother Theron spoke of. Everything else, the strong walls, the locked door, the vigilant shepherd, were merely reflections of that primary, ultimate safety. They were the reminders, not the source. A deep sense of understanding, not intellectual but experiential, began to settle over her. It was like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, not in her mind, but in her spirit. The day's striving, the mental effort to capture the essence of peace in a drawing, had been a form of wrestling. Now, in the quiet surrender of the evening, the wrestling could cease. She didn't need to create the peace. She needed to enter into the peace that was already being offered, already present in the very fabric of this trusting village, in the rhythm of the seasons, in the promise embedded in the sacred texts she copied. She finished her tea and set the empty mug back on the stool. The embers in the fireplace sighed, collapsing in on themselves in a final, soft shower of sparks. The room was now lit only by the faint starlight filtering through the single window. It was not a darkness of fear, but a darkness of embrace, like closing one's eyes. The sounds from outside were no longer distractions but part of the night's gentle tapestry. The cricket's chorus, the whisper of the trees, the distant call of the night birds. They were the sounds of a world that was also at rest, held in the same faithful hands. She thought of the P on the vellum, its empty, outlined form. Tomorrow she would begin to fill it. She would mix the azure for the flowers, not as a color of distant, cold sky, but as the deep, comforting twilight that now held her cottage. She would prepare the silver for the leaves, not as a metallic shine, but as the gentle glimmer of starlight on a still pond. The color and the life would not come from her forcing them onto the page, but from her allowing the peace she was now feeling to flow down her arm, through her brush, and onto the vellum. The art would become an act of testimony, a record of a soul's encounter with a safety that passes all understanding. With this thought, a profound and effortless calm washed over her, as gentle and inevitable as the incoming tide. She was ready. She was safe. She was at peace. Section 4 of 30. Elara lay down, her head sinking into the goose-down pillow that released a faint scent of sun and fresh air from its recent airing. She pulled the woolen blanket up to her chin, its weight a familiar and comforting anchor. The coarse linen of the sheets was cool against her skin, but she knew her body's warmth would soon transform them into a soft, personal cocoon. She lay on her back, her hands resting palm up on the blanket beside her, a posture of open receptivity. She closed her eyes, but the world did not immediately disappear. Instead, it transformed into a landscape of sound and sensation. She could feel the slight, resilient give of the straw-stuffed mattress beneath her, could hear the soft rustle as she shifted to find the perfect position. She could hear the steady, slow ticking of the clock on the mantel, a sound so regular and predictable it seemed to be measuring out the very beats of the night's quiet heart. Tick-tock, a sound that marked the passage of time. But here, in this space of peace, it did not feel like a rush toward something, but a gentle, rhythmic rocking, a lullaby of constancy. Her breathing began to slow, to deepen, syncing itself unconsciously with the slow, patient rhythm of the clock. She drew the night air deep into her lungs, smelling the lingering chamomile, the beeswax, the faint, earthy scent of the stone walls. With each exhalation, she felt a layer of the day's residual tension release its hold. The slight worry over a difficult flourish in the manuscript, the fleeting irritation at a spilled pot of ink, the abstract wonderings about the world beyond Atheria. All of it began to seem small and distant, like clouds seen from a high, quiet mountain. She invited the words of the psalm to drift through her mind, not as a text to be analyzed, but as a melody to be felt. In peace I will lie down and sleep. She was doing that now. The lying down was a physical act, but the peace was a spiritual one, an atmosphere her soul was now breathing. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. The you alone was the bedrock. In this liminal space between waking and sleeping, the truth of it felt self-evident. The locked door was a symbol, but the true lock was the divine promise. The sturdy walls were a metaphor for a protection that was not made with hands. The shepherd watching over the village flocks was a living icon of a greater, unseen shepherd. Her mind, untethered from the rigid logic of daytime, began to weave images. She saw her cottage not just as a building, but as a small, lighted boat floating on a vast, dark, but peaceful ocean. The ocean was the universe, the night, the unknown. But the boat was held, guided, and kept afloat by a hand that cupped the waters themselves. She felt not adrift, but purposefully anchored in the midst of the deep. The sounds of the night were the lapping of gentle waves against the hull, a soothing, rhythmic assurance that all was well. She thought of the people of Atheria, all in their own beds, in their own lighted boats on this same ocean. Liam the shepherd, his hands rough from work, now still in sleep. Old Maeve the weaver, her creative mind at rest. Brother Theron in his small cell at the scriptorium, his wisdom now silent in slumber. The children in the village, untroubled by anything beyond the warmth of their blankets and the love of their parents. They were all dwelling in safety. They were all held in the same faithful watchcare. A sense of profound connection, of shared humanity and shared grace, washed over her. She was not alone in her peace. She was part of a chorus of rest, a symphony of sleeping souls trusting in the same good God. A deep, contented sigh escaped her lips, a final, conscious release of the waking world. Her body felt heavy, relaxed, fully surrendered to the support of the bed. The edges of her consciousness began to soften and blur. The ticking of the clock faded from a distinct sound into a mere pulse in the background of her awareness. The feeling of the blanket became less a specific sensation and more a general, all-encompassing warmth. The images in her mind dissolved into abstract patterns of light and shadow, like the dappled sun through leaves. She was crossing the threshold. The intention to sleep was becoming the reality of sleep. The peace that had been a conscious choice was now becoming an unconscious state. She was lying down in peace, and now she was sleeping in it. The last coherent thought was not a thought at all, but a wordless feeling of gratitude, a final, soft echo of the psalm in the silent sanctuary of her heart. Section 5 of 30. Outside Elara's cottage, the world of night held its serene and vigilant watch. The moon, a silver sliver like a polished thumbnail paring, had climbed high above the wooded hill, casting a faint, milky light that etched the world in shades of gray and silver. It painted the leaves of the oak trees with a delicate, mercury-brushed highlight and turned the dewdrops gathering on the rose petals by her door into a scattering of tiny, captured stars. The wind had settled into the softest of breaths, just enough to make the highest branches of the pines sway with a slow, sighing rhythm, a sound like the ocean heard from a great distance. In the sheep pen beside Liam's cottage, the flock was settled. They were dark, huddled shapes against the lighter earth, their sides rising and falling in the slow, steady rhythm of untroubled sleep. Occasionally, one would let out a soft, muffled bleat, a fragment of a dream of green pastures and running streams. High above, on a rocky outcrop that overlooked the village, the silhouette of Liam's sheepdog, Bran, was just visible. He was not sleeping, but sitting upright, his ears pricked, his nose testing the air. He was the embodiment of the granted safety, a loyal, watchful presence whose vigilance allowed the flock to rest without a care. He was a living, breathing testament to the you alone that made dwelling in safety possible. In the scriptorium, Brother Theron stood for a moment at his own small window, looking out over the sleeping village. He could not see Elara's cottage from here, but he knew the path she had walked, the peace she had sought. A gentle smile touched his lips. He had seen the questioning in her eyes, the desire of the artist to capture the ineffable. He knew that the best teacher for such things was not an old man with words, but the quiet of the night and the surrender of the soul. He whispered the verse into the darkness, his voice a dry leaf rustle. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. It was a prayer for her, for the village, for all the troubled hearts in the wide world who had not yet learned to lie down and trust. Then, he too turned and went to his own rest, his faith as simple and solid as the stones of his cell. Back in the cottage, Elara was deep in the embrace of sleep. Her breathing was slow and even, a quiet tide in the dark room. Her face, which during the day held the focused intensity of her craft, was now smooth and untroubled, the face of a child who knows they are loved and protected. She dreamed, and in her dream, she was not a scribe, but a child herself, running through a sun-drenched meadow. The sky above was the exact azure blue she had imagined for the flowers in her illumination. The sun was warm on her skin, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of clover and wild thyme. She felt a profound, effortless joy, a sense of belonging to the beautiful, benevolent world around her. In the dream, she came to the edge of a still, clear pond. The water was so calm it was a perfect mirror, reflecting the sky and the surrounding trees with flawless clarity. She knelt down and saw her own reflection, but it was not the face of a child, nor the face of the woman she was. It was a face of pure peace, eyes full of a deep, knowing light. And then, as she looked, a single silver leaf detached itself from a tree overhead and drifted down, landing on the surface of the pond. It did not break the surface tension, but rested upon it, perfectly supported. It did not sink, but floated, held by a law of the universe it did not need to understand. Simply was, and it was held. A voice, not from outside but from within the very fabric of the dream, of the air, of her own being, spoke the words that were now the foundation of her rest. For you alone, make me dwell in safety. The dream shifted, the images softening and dissolving, but the feeling remained, the feeling of being that silver leaf, resting effortlessly on the surface of a great, calm depth, held by a power both immense and intimately gentle. Her sleep was not an emptiness, but a fullness. It was not an escape from the world, but a deeper immersion into its true, underlying reality of grace and protection. The night continued its slow, majestic turn around her small cottage. The stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. The creatures of the dark went about their secret business. And within the walls of that stone cottage, under the thatched roof, a soul dwelled in safety, and in peace she slept. Section 6 of 30. The dawn did not crash into Atheria, but seeped into it. A slow and gentle infusion of light that diluted the indigo of the night into soft shades of lavender, rose, and finally, a clear, pale gold. The first sound was not an alarm, but the chorus of birdsong from the woods behind Elara's cottage, a cheerful, liquid chatter that filled the air without shattering the peace. It was a music of recreation, a daily hymn to the return of the light. Elara awoke not with a jolt, but with a slow, graceful surfacing, as if emerging from the depths of a warm, calm sea. For a long moment, she lay still, her eyes still closed, conducting a quiet inventory of her being. There was no remnant of the previous day's tension in her neck. The thoughtful knot in her mind had completely dissolved. In its place was a spacious, quiet clarity, a mind like a still lake reflecting the morning sky. She felt rested in a way that was more than physical. It was a rest that had reached the very core of her spirit. The memory of the night's peace was not a memory at all, but a present reality, a warmth that still lingered in her limbs and a calm that filled her chest. She opened her eyes. The room was filled with a soft, gray-gold light. Dust motes, children of the new day, were already dancing in a sunbeam that slanted through the window, soon to fall across her work table. She stretched, a long, languorous unfurling of her body, feeling every muscle awaken with a pleasant, supple readiness. The dream of the silver leaf on the pond was vivid in her mind, not as a narrative to be dissected, but as a felt truth. The feeling of being perfectly, effortlessly supported was the first sensation of her day, the foundational note upon which the symphony of the morning would be built. She rose and pulled back the curtain from her small window. The world outside was jeweled with dew. Every blade of grass, every petal of the climbing rose, every leaf on the oak tree, was set with 1,000 tiny, perfect spheres of water, each one capturing and refracting the morning light into miniature rainbows. It was as if the night had wept tears of pure joy, leaving a glittering testament to its passing. The air that flowed in was cool and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and the sweet perfume of the roses. She took a deep, deliberate breath, feeling it cleanse her from the inside out. Her morning rituals were as deliberate and peaceful as her evening ones had been. She stirred the embers of last night's fire, added a few small pieces of kindling and a single split log, and soon had a modest, cheerful flame dancing on the hearth. The kettle was filled and set to boil. As she waited, she did not fret or hurry. She simply stood at the open door, watching the village slowly come to life. She saw smoke begin to curl from Liam's chimney, a pale gray ribbon against the brightening blue sky. She saw old Maeve emerge to scatter seed for the sparrows that hopped eagerly on her path. There was no rush, no frantic energy. It was a community awakening in unison with the natural world. Each person, each creature, playing their part in the gentle unfolding of the day. She ate a simple breakfast of yesterday's bread with a drizzle of honey from the hives on the sunny side of the hill, and a handful of wild strawberries she had gathered the previous afternoon. The food tasted more vivid, more itself, as it often did when consumed in a state of gratitude. The honey was the taste of sunlight and clover, the strawberries a burst of sweet, red essence. She was not merely feeding her body. She was grounding herself in the simple, good gifts of the earth, gifts that pointed back to a generous giver. When she was done, she washed her face in the cool water from her pitcher, the shock of it a bright, awakening blessing on her skin. She dressed in a clean, simple dress of undyed linen, and coiled her hair neatly at the nape of her neck. She packed a fresh sheet of vellum, her quills, and her pigments into her satchel. As she did this, she glanced at the small, polished metal mirror by her washstand. The face that looked back was her own, yet it seemed to hold a new light in the eyes, a softer set to the mouth. It was the face of someone who had not just slept, but had truly rested in the deepest sense of the word. She smiled at her reflection, a quiet, private smile of acknowledgement. Today, she would not be trying to create peace. She would be attempting to translate the peace she had received. With a final, contented look around her quiet cottage, she opened the door and stepped out into the promise of the new day. Section 7 of 30. The walk to the scriptorium in the morning was a different experience than the evening return. The path was now dappled with sunlight filtering through the canopy of the oaks, creating a shifting mosaic of light and shadow on the ground. The air was alive with purpose. Bees were already busy among the flowers in the gardens, their hum a steady, industrious drone. The scent of baking bread from the village bakery wove through the air, a warm, yeasty perfume that spoke of comfort and daily sustenance. She passed Liam, who was already leading his flock out to the high meadows. He tipped his wide-brimmed hat to her, his face weathered and kind. "A fine morning, Scribe Elara," he called out, his voice robust and cheerful. "A fine morning, Liam," she replied. "The sheep look content." "That they are," he said, gesturing with his crook towards the flock that flowed around his legs like a woolly river. "They had a safe night. No alarms. They graze with happy hearts today." His words were a simple statement of fact, but to Elara, they felt like a confirmation of the verse that had been her companion. A safe night led to a happy, productive day. The foundation of peace supported all that was built upon it. She saw children running along a parallel path, their satchels bouncing on their backs as they headed for the village schoolhouse. Their laughter was like the ringing of small, clear bells, utterly free and unburdened. They did not yet have the vocabulary for the theology of peace, but they lived it instinctively in their trust that their world was safe, that their needs would be met, that their laughter was welcome. They were little scribes themselves, in a way, writing the truth of trust with their every action. When she arrived at the scriptorium, Brother Theron was already there, as was his custom. He was not at his desk, but standing before the great eastern window, his hands clasped behind his back, silhouetted by the morning sun. He was perfectly still, absorbing the light and the quiet. He heard her enter and turned slowly, a smile illuminating his wrinkled face like the sun emerging from behind a cloud. "You have brought the morning in with you, child," he observed, his eyes twinkling. "I can see it on your face. The question that was in your eyes yesterday has gone. It has been answered." Elara returned his smile, setting her satchel down on her work table. "It has, brother, not with words but with sleep." She laughed softly, the sound light and easy in the quiet room. "I understand now a little. I understand that the peace is not in the drawing, but in the hand that draws. It has to be in me first, before it can be on the vellum." Theron nodded, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. "You have learned the most important lesson any artist, any person, can learn. We are not creators in the ultimate sense. We are conduits. We do not manufacture glory. We channel it. The source is outside of us. Our job is to clean the channel, to remove the blockages of fear and striving, so that the water of life can flow through." He gestured to her table. "Your channel is clear this morning. I expect the work will show it." Elara sat down and carefully unpacked her tools. She laid out the sheet of vellum with the outlined P. In the fresh, clear light of morning, the lines looked different. They no longer seemed like a cage she had to fill, but like a scaffold, a supportive structure upon which something beautiful could grow. She took out her pigments, the lapis lazuli for the deep blue, the precious silver leaf for the highlights, the malachite for the green of the stems. She prepared her binding medium, grinding the pigments with the egg yolk with a rhythmic, meditative motion. There was no anxiety in the preparation, only a sense of sacred anticipation. She selected her finest brush, a sable hair point that could render the most delicate of lines. She dipped it into the first wash of azure, a color mixed to mirror the twilight sky from her window last night. She looked at the empty space within the curve of the P. Yesterday, it had been a void to be conquered. Today, it was a sanctuary to be furnished. She took a deep, calm breath, feeling the peace of the morning, the memory of the night, the truth of the psalm, all coalesce within her. Then, with a hand that was both confident and humble, she touched the brush to the vellum and began to lay down the first stroke of color. Section 8 of 30. The color flowed from the brush onto the page not as a mere pigment, but as a liquid manifestation of the tranquility that filled her. The first wash of blue was thin and translucent, like the highest, most delicate part of the evening sky where the last light still hesitates. She worked from light to dark, building the color in layers, just as peace is built in layers upon the foundation of safety. Each stroke was applied not with force, but with a gentle guidance, allowing the brush to find its way, to follow the natural curve and flow of the letterform she had established the day before. As she worked, her entire world contracted to the point where the sable hairs met the surface of the vellum. The scratch of the quill was replaced by the almost silent whisper of the brush. The scriptorium, Brother Theron, the village sounds. All of it receded into a pleasant, distant hum. She was not Elara the scribe striving to create a masterpiece. She was Elara the vessel, through which a feeling of peace was being translated into a visual form. The dream of the silver leaf returned to her, and she saw the blue of the pond's reflective surface. She was not painting a letter. She was painting the feeling of being perfectly supported on a deep, calm stillness. She moved on to the greens, mixing the malachite to create the vibrant, living color of the vine itself. She painted the leaves, giving each one a slight curl, a suggestion of movement, as if a gentle breeze were stirring them. She painted the thorns, not as sharp, threatening things, but as small, honest details of the vine's nature, part of its authentic beauty and its means of protection. The vine was strong, it was alive, it could withstand the elements, and it provided a structure upon which the flowers could bloom. It was another echo of the psalm, the Lord as a strong vine, a shelter, a true home in which one could dwell. Brother Theron moved about the scriptorium quietly, attending to his own tasks. He would occasionally pause at a distance to observe her work, but he did not interrupt. He could see the focus in her posture, but it was a relaxed focus, devoid of the tension that had been there yesterday. He saw the way her hand moved, steady, fluid, assured. He nodded to himself, a silent prayer of thanks on his lips. The best teaching had been done not by him, but by the night, by the spirit, by the simple, profound act of trust. Hours slipped by, marked only by the slow journey of the sunbeam across the stone floor. Elara paused only to stretch her fingers, to sip from a cup of water, to look out the window for a moment and let her eyes rest on the distant green of the hills. These were not breaks in her concentration, but part of its rhythm, like the rest between breaths. She felt a deep, sustaining joy in the work. This was why she had become a scribe, not for the glory of it, nor for the beauty of the finished product alone, but for this state of being, this unified state where her soul, her mind, her body, and her craft were all aligned in a single, harmonious purpose. Finally, it was time for the silver. This was the most delicate part of the process. She carefully laid a thin layer of adhesive size onto the areas where the silver leaf was to be applied, the highlights on the leaves, the delicate veins, the stamen of the flowers yet to be painted. With a pair of fine tweezers, she lifted the impossibly thin sheet of silver, a fragile shaving of moonlight. The air in the room seemed to still, as if holding its breath. With the utmost care, she laid the silver onto the sized area and gently brushed it into place. Then, with a soft, polished agate burnisher, she began to rub the back of the leaf, transferring its brilliant, metallic sheen permanently onto the page. As she burnished, the silver erupted into life. It was no longer a dull metal, but a radiant, living light. It caught the sunlight from the window and threw it back, making the entire letter seem to glow from within. It was the glimmer of starlight on the pond, the confident gleam in a trusting eye, the reflected glory of the divine safety. It was not a loud or boastful light, but a quiet, confident radiance. The P was no longer just an letter. It was becoming a testament. The foundation had been laid, and now the color and the life were flourishing upon it, just as Brother Theron had said they would. Elara sat back, her heart swelling with a quiet awe. She was not the creator of this beauty. She was its grateful witness. Section 9 of 30. The sun had passed its zenith when Elara finally set her brush down for the midday meal. Her back ached pleasantly, and there was a slight tremor of fatigue in her hand, but it was the satisfied weariness of a field worker after a good harvest. She looked at the illuminated P. It was not finished. The central flourish and the smallest details remained, but its essential character was now established. The deep, tranquil blue of the flower petals, the vibrant green of the vine, and the brilliant, burnished silver of the highlights worked together in a silent, harmonious chorus. The word Pax now began with a small, self-contained vision of the very piece it named. Brother Theron brought over a simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples, setting a portion on the corner of her table. "You have done fine work this morning, Elara," he said, his voice low and respectful. "The letter has a quiet soul. It does not shout, but it speaks profoundly to those who have the ears to see." "Thank you, brother," she said, looking from her work to him. It felt different today, felt given, as if the piece was already there in the vellum, and I was just uncovering it, like a sculptor freeing the statue from the marble. He nodded, taking a bite of his apple. "That is the secret that all the great masters know, though few can articulate it. We are discoverers, not inventors. We are midwives, not mothers. The beauty, the truth, the peace, it all pre-exists our efforts. Our sacred task is to remove the obstacles to its manifestation." He gestured with the apple towards the page. "You removed a great obstacle yesterday, the obstacle of your own striving. And look what has emerged." They ate in a comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sound the crunch of the apples and the distant call of a hawk circling high above the meadows. Elara felt a deep sense of contentment, not pride in her accomplishment, but gratitude for having been used as an instrument for something beautiful. "Brother," she said after a while, "the verse says you alone. Seems so exclusive. What of the strong walls, the locked door, the watchful shepherd? Are they nothing?" Theron finished chewing thoughtfully before answering. "A profound question. They are not nothing. They are something, but they are not the ultimate thing. Think of it this way. The rain is a gift from God that waters the crops. The farmer is a gift from God who tills the soil. The sun is a gift from God that provides the light. We give thanks for the rain, the farmer, and the sun. But we worship the giver, not the gifts. The walls, the door, the shepherd, they are all gifts. Good gifts for which we should be thankful. But our final trust, our ultimate reliance, is placed in the giver of the gifts. He alone is the foundation that cannot be shaken. If the wall crumbles, if the door is breached, if the shepherd falls, the one who trusts in the giver alone still has a foundation. You alone does not negate the gifts. It puts them in their proper, secondary place." Elara considered this, breaking off a piece of bread. It made perfect sense. Her trust in the locked door was real, but it was a provisional trust. Her trust in the Lord was absolute. The one did not cancel out the other. Rather, the absolute trust sanctified the provisional one. It allowed her to lock her door at night without anxiety because even if the lock failed, her safety did not. It was the difference between living in a house you yourself had built on sand and living in a house built for you by a master builder on an unshakable rock. You could still enjoy the furniture, the warmth of the fire, the view from the window, but your security came from the rock, not the wallpaper. "This changes everything," she whispered, more to herself than to Theron. "It does," he agreed softly. "It is the difference between a life of fear and a life of peace. It is the secret of lying down and sleeping, even when the storms rage outside. For the storm cannot touch the rock." Finished with her meal, Elara carefully cleaned her hands of any crumbs or oil before returning to her work. The afternoon stretched before her, not as a span of time to be filled with labor, but as a wide, open meadow in which to wander with her craft. She picked up her finest-tipped brush. It was time to add the most intricate details: the delicate veins on the petals, the subtle texture of the leaves, the tiny seeds at the heart of the flower. This was work that required a supreme steadiness of hand and spirit. But her hand was steady, and her spirit was calm. She had her answer. She knew the source of her peace, and in knowing it, she was free to pour that peace onto the page, one meticulous, loving stroke at a time. Section 10 of 30. The afternoon light in the scriptorium grew long and golden, laying itself across the floor in great warm slabs. The sound of Elara's breathing was soft and even, a counter-rhythm to the almost imperceptible whisper of her brush. She was in the final stages of the illumination, adding the tiny, almost microscopic details that would bring the entire composition to life. With a hair-thin line of a darker blue, she traced the delicate veins on the flower petals, like the paths of tiny rivers on a celestial map. With a dot of the purest white, she placed a highlight in the very center of each silver stamen, making it seem as if it captured and held a speck of the sun itself. This was work that could not be rushed. It required a patience that was itself a form of prayer. Each minute stroke was an act of love, a commitment to the beauty she was serving. There was no room for hurry, for hurry was a form of fear, the fear of not having enough time. But Elara, anchored in the peace of the alone, felt no such fear. She had all the time she needed, because her time was held in the same hands that held her safety. The ticking of the clock was no longer a measure of scarcity, but a melody of abundance, marking the gracious gift of each passing moment. As she worked, her mind was quiet, not empty, but full of a wordless contentment. The theology Brother Theron had explained had settled from an intellectual concept into a settled reality in her heart. She thought of the locked door of her cottage. Tonight, when she bolted it, it would be an act of stewardship, a sensible use of a good gift, not a frantic act of self-preservation. The lock was a prayer made of iron and wood, a physical expression of "Thy will be done." But her sleep would not depend on its strength. Her sleep would depend on the faithfulness of the one who had given her the cottage, the lock, and the night itself. She thought of Liam and his flock. Bran the sheepdog was a good gift. His vigilance was a gift. But the ultimate shepherd of both Liam and his sheep was the Lord. The dog could grow tired, could be distracted, could be overcome. But the divine shepherd neither slumbers nor sleeps. The flock's true safety came from that eternal watchfulness. This understanding did not diminish the value of the dog, but rather elevated it, setting it within a grand, cosmic story of protection and care. Finally, she laid down her brush. She did so not because the work was perfectly finished. An artist could always find one more tiny detail to add, but because she knew in her spirit that it was complete. The P for Pax was now a tiny window into the peace of God. It had depth, it had light, it had life. It was strong and gentle, vibrant and tranquil, all at once. The empty outline had been filled not just with color, but with meaning. She carefully blotted any excess moisture and moved the vellum to a safe spot on her desk to dry fully. Then she began the slow, methodical process of cleaning her brushes, wiping her palettes, and sealing her pigments. This closing ritual felt as sacred as the work itself. It was a way of honoring the tools that had been her partners in this act of translation. It was a way of bringing the creative work to a gentle, orderly close, just as the day was now gently closing outside the window. Brother Theron came over and stood beside her, looking down at the finished illumination. He was silent for a long time. The golden light of the setting sun fell directly upon it, causing the silver to blaze and the blues and greens to glow with an inner fire. "It is good," he said finally. and the simplicity of the statement carried the weight of a profound blessing. You have not merely depicted a word, Elara. You have offered a sanctuary. Anyone who is troubled, anyone who is afraid, anyone who has forgotten what it means to feel safe, can look upon this letter and find a place to rest their soul. You have created a visual psalm. Elara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the setting sun. It was the warmth of humble fulfillment. She had set out to understand a verse, and in doing so, she had lived it. She had lain down in peace and slept, and she had awoken to create from that place of rest. The cycle was complete, and yet it was also just beginning. For tomorrow, she would begin the next word, and the next, each one an opportunity to delve deeper into the endless well of peace that was found in trusting, not in the gifts, but in the giver alone. She gathered her things, said a quiet goodnight to Brother Theron, and stepped out into the evening, ready to walk the path home, not with a question in her heart, but with an answer that sang softly in her soul with every step she took. Section 11 of 30. The walk home was a liturgy of evening. Each familiar sight, the gnarled root that breached the path, the particular bend where the wild mint grew, the old stone wall draped in ivy, was like a line in a well-loved prayer, recited not with words, but with the quiet rhythm of her footsteps. The golden light of the setting sun poured through the forest, transforming the world into a cathedral of light and shadow. The air was cool and carried the rich, humus scent of the forest floor, a fragrance of decay and renewal that was profoundly soothing. Elara carried the afterglow of the day's work within her, a soft, warm luminescence that seemed to emanate from her very core. There was no fatigue in her step, only a pleasant, grounded weariness. The satisfaction was not the pride of accomplishment, but the deeper, quieter joy of alignment, the feeling that she had spent her day in harmony with her purpose and her peace. She replayed Brother Theron's words in her mind. You have offered a sanctuary. That was what she had wanted, though she hadn't known how to name it. Not to create a beautiful object, but to build a small, visual refuge for a weary soul. She passed the village well, where a few women were drawing water for the evening, their laughter soft and melodious. They greeted her, and their smiles seemed to hold a new layer of recognition, as if they could see the serenity that cloaked her. She saw the children being called in from their games, their voices piping like sparrows settling for the night. She saw the blacksmith, his great strength spent for the day, sitting on a bench outside his forge, simply watching the sky change color. There was a collective, unhurried exhalation happening across Atheria, a communal laying down of burdens. When she reached her cottage, it welcomed her not just as a shelter, but as a partner in her peace. The crimson roses by the door seemed to glow with a deeper hue in the twilight, their perfume a sweet, welcoming incense. She unlatched the door and stepped inside. The room was cool and dim, but it did not feel empty. It felt expectant, waiting to be filled with the simple, sacred rituals of the evening. She did not rush to light a lamp. Instead, she stood for a moment in the soft gloom, allowing her eyes to adjust, feeling the quiet of the space seep into her. This was the lying down of the day itself, the world preparing for its holy rest. Her movements were fluid, unhurried. She built her small fire, and as the flames took hold, they cast their familiar, dancing patterns on the walls, painting the room with warmth and life. She prepared her simple supper, a bowl of soup she had left to simmer slowly over the banked coals of the hearth since morning, its flavors now deep and melded. As she ate, she looked around her home. The sturdy walls, the locked door, the warm fire, they were all good gifts. But tonight, she saw them for what they were, tangible signs of an intangible grace. They were the physical expressions of the safety granted by the Lord alone. She could appreciate them, enjoy them, and be thankful for them without making them the foundation of her security. Her foundation was the rock. These were the beautiful and well-appointed house built upon it. After her meal, she did not immediately begin her preparations for sleep. Instead, she took her shawl from its peg and wrapped it around her shoulders. She stepped back outside, leaving the door ajar to let the firelight spill out in a golden path onto the grass. The last embers of the sunset were fading in the west, and the first stars were emerging in the east, bold and clear. The evening star, Venus, hung like a perfect, polished diamond just above the line of the wooded hill. She walked a little way from the cottage and sat on a smooth, flat stone that served as her evening bench. Here she practiced simply being. She listened to the night sounds not as a collection of separate noises, but as a single, complex, and harmonious piece of music. She felt the cool air on her face. She watched the stars multiply, each one a tiny puncture of light in the dark velvet of the sky, each one a declaration of a cosmos vast beyond comprehension, yet ordered and held by a law and a love equally vast. She was a small creature on a small world, and the knowledge was not frightening but liberating. Her worries, her struggles, her need to control, how insignificant they seemed under this canopy of stars. And yet, the same hand that held these spinning galaxies in their courses held her. The piece that she had translated onto the vellum today was the same piece that held the universe. She was participating in a cosmic reality. She sat there for a long time, breathing it in, until the night grew deep and the coolness prompted her to move. She rose, feeling calm and centered, and returned to her cottage, ready to complete the day's final, most important work, the work of rest. Section 12 of 30. Back inside, the cottage enveloped her in its warmth. The fire had settled into a steady, ruby glow, pulsing gently like a sleeping heart. The rituals of the evening began again, but tonight they felt even more deeply ingrained, more meaningful. She washed her face and hands, the cool water a refreshing seal on the day. She changed into her nightgown, the soft linen a gentle caress against her skin. She took down her hair and brushed it, each stroke a deliberate act of releasing the day, of smoothing out the tiny snarls of mental activity until her mind was as untangled and smooth as her hair. She poured a cup of water and set it by her bed, a small, practical preparation that was also a symbol of trust. Trust that she would wake to a new day, that her needs would be met. She checked the bolt on the door, not with a frantic tug of fear, but with a calm, responsible gesture. It was like saying amen at the end of a prayer, a firm, confident conclusion. The lock was engaged. Her part was done. The rest was in the hands of the one who granted safety. She knelt beside her bed for a moment, not in a long, formal prayer, but in a posture of quiet gratitude. She did not list her requests or her worries. She simply rested in the presence of the divine, like a child sitting quietly at the feet of a loving parent, too content for words. The events of the day played back in her mind like a silent, blessed film. The morning light on the dewy grass, the feel of the brush in her hand, the emergence of the color on the vellum, Brother Theron's wise words, the walk home through the golden cathedral of the forest, the vast, starry sky. It was a tapestry of grace. She offered a simple, "Thank you." Then she rose and slipped into bed. The feeling of the cool sheets against her skin was instantly comforting. The weight of the blanket was like a gentle, reassuring hand on her body. She lay on her back, looking up at the dark shapes of the rafters, faintly visible in the dim, pulsing light from the hearth. She invited her body to relax, starting with her toes, consciously releasing any tension, then moving to her feet, her ankles, her calves. It was a slow, deliberate journey of surrender, moving up through her body, unclenching, letting go, allowing the bed to fully support her. When she reached her face, she relaxed her jaw, her cheeks, the tiny muscles around her eyes. Her body felt heavy, warm, and utterly at peace. Then, she brought the illuminated P to her mind's eye. She did not critique it or analyze it. She simply gazed at it in her imagination, allowing its visual peace to wash over her. The deep, tranquil blue, the vibrant, living green, the radiant silver. She saw it not as her creation, but as a gift she had been permitted to receive and to share. It was a fixed point of beauty and truth in her mind, an anchor for her soul. The word Pax was now inextricably linked in her being with the feeling of lying safely in the dark, held by a love that would not let her go. The verse from Psalm 4 surfaced, not as a recitation, but as a lived experience. "In peace I will lie down and sleep." She was lying down, Peace was not a goal to be reached, but the very ground upon which she was already resting. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. The you alone was the bedrock beneath the ground, the fundamental reality of her existence. The walls, the lock, the village, the shepherd, all were beloved details in the landscape of this safety, but they were not its source. A deep, sighing breath escaped her, the final release of the waking self. The boundary between her body and the bed seemed to dissolve. She was not on the bed. She was of the bed, a part of the quiet cottage, a part of the sleeping village, a part of the starlit universe, all held in the boundless safety of God. The sounds of the night, the crackle of the embers, the ticking of the clock, they all blended into a single, soothing hum, the sound of the world at rest. Her consciousness, like a gentle tide, began to ebb, pulling back from the shores of alertness and thought, retreating into the vast, quiet ocean of sleep. There was no struggle, no resistance. It was a graceful, willing surrender. She was safe. She was at peace. And so she slept. Section 13 of 30. The peace of the village at night was a tangible presence, a blanket woven from silence and starlight that lay gently over the hills and cottages. In her cottage, Elara's sleep was deep and dreamless, a profound immersion into the restorative darkness. Her body, freed from the directives of her conscious will, embarked on its own sacred work of repair and renewal. Her breath was slow and even, a soft tide in the quiet room. Her heart beat its steady, rhythmic drum, a reliable watchman through the silent hours. Outside, the cosmos continued its majestic, silent dance. The moon arced across the sky, its silver light waxing and waning as scudding clouds passed before its face. A fox trotted along the edge of the wood, its eyes gleaming for a moment in the moonlight before it disappeared into the shadows on its own mysterious errand. An owl, perched high in the pine tree near Elara's cottage, swiveled its head, listening for the nearly imperceptible rustle of a vole in the grass below. These were the movements of the night world, purposeful, wild, and yet part of the same ordered whole. They were not interruptions of the peace, but expressions of it. A peace that included both the profound rest of the human village and the vigilant life of the natural world. In the scriptorium, Brother Theron slept in his small cell. His sleep was that of a man who had long ago placed his trust in the you alone. His face, in repose, was a map of a life lived in faith, the lines not of worry, but of laughter and contemplation. He dreamed of a great, illuminated book where every letter was a living thing, a vine or a flower or a star, all singing a silent hymn of praise. In the shepherd's cottage, Liam slept the sleep of the justly weary, one ear unconsciously tuned to the occasional, soft bleat from the pen outside, a sound that did not alarm him, but only confirmed that all was well with his flock. His dog, Bran, slept at the foot of his bed, but his sleep was light, and every so often, one ear would twitch, a testament to the watchfulness that was his nature and his gift. The peace of Atheria was not an absence of activity, but a harmony of trusts. The villagers trusted in the strength of their community, the fertility of their land, the changing of the seasons. But underpinning it all was the deeper, unspoken trust in the providence that sustained it all. This trust allowed for a rest that was unguarded, a sleep that was a true surrender. There were no sentries on the walls because the Lord was their sentry. There were no locks strong enough to keep out every fear, but there was a faith strong enough to disarm fear at the door. In the deepest part of the night, a change came over the weather. A bank of clouds, soft and gray, moved in from the west, slowly blotting out the stars. A gentle wind picked up, sighing through the pines with a sound like distant ocean waves. Then came the rain. It began not with a violent downpour, but with a soft, steady pattering on the thatched roofs of the village. On Elara's roof, the sound was a soothing, rhythmic drumming, a natural lullaby. It was the sound of the earth being watered, of the dust being settled, of the world being washed clean. Inside, Elara stirred slightly in her sleep. The sound of the rain did not wake her, but wove itself into the fabric of her dreams. She dreamed she was the silver leaf again, but now it was raining in the dream, and each drop that hit the surface of the pond created a perfect, expanding circle before merging into the whole. The leaf rode the tiny ripples, bobbing gently, but it did not sink. It was still held. The rain was not a threat, but a part of the environment in which it was perfectly safe to float. The dream was a confirmation. Peace was not dependent on fair weather. The safety granted by the Lord alone was a safety that held in sunshine and in storm, in clarity and in cloud. The rain on the roof was a physical manifestation of this truth, a gentle, percussive blessing assuring all who slept beneath it that they were protected, provided for, and loved. Section 14 of 30. Elara awoke to a world transformed by rain. The first light of dawn was a muted, gray pearl color, filtering through a sky still heavy with moisture. The sound that greeted her was not the cheerful chorus of birds, but the steady, gentle drip, drip, drip of water from the thatched eaves onto the stones below. It was a slower, more meditative rhythm than the birdsong, but no less beautiful. She lay still for a while, listening to it, feeling the cool, damp air that filled the room. The fire had gone out completely, leaving only a pile of white ash, but she felt no chill. There was a freshness to the air, a cleanness, as if the world had been scoured and made new. She rose and went to the window. The world outside was washed in 1,000 shades of green, all intensified and deepened by the rain. The roses hung heavy with droplets, each one a liquid jewel. The leaves of the oak trees glistened. A low mist clung to the lower parts of the valley, shrouding the village in a soft, mysterious veil. It was a different kind of beauty than the golden sunrise of the previous day, softer, more contemplative, more intimate. It was a beauty that did not shout its glory, but whispered its grace. She thought of her dream, of the leaf on the rippling water. The rain had not disrupted its peace. It had become part of it. This was a new layer of understanding. The peace of God was not a fragile state, easily shattered by a change in circumstances. It was resilient, adaptable, able to incorporate the rhythms of storm and drizzle into its deep, abiding melody. The safety she dwelt in was not a fair-weather safety. It was an all-weather safety. The you alone was a constant, as present in the gray, dripping dawn as it was in the brilliant, golden sunset. She built a new fire, the kindling hissing slightly from the dampness in the air before catching flame. The new fire was smaller, a determined, bright heart in the cool, gray room. She boiled water for tea, choosing a blend of peppermint today. Its sharp, clean scent a perfect complement to the rain-washed world. As she prepared her breakfast, she felt a quiet excitement. The rain meant the scriptorium would be especially cozy. The stone building would hold the cool dampness at bay, and the light would be soft and diffuse, perfect for the detailed work that lay ahead. She was to begin the word, I. The next part of the phrase, in peace I will lie down. The walk to the scriptorium was a wet, fragrant journey. She wore a hooded cloak, and the sound of her footsteps was muffled by the damp earth. The forest smelled profoundly alive, of wet bark, rich soil, and the crushed fragrance of damp ferns. She saw snails on the path, their shells beautifully polished by the rain. She saw a spiderweb strung between two branches, beaded with moisture like a necklace of tiny, perfect pearls. The rain had revealed a world of subtle, hidden beauties that the bright sun often overlooked. It was a reminder that peace, too, had its hidden dimensions, its quiet, dripping, patient beauties that were only revealed when the brilliant light of easy joy was temporarily veiled. When she arrived at the scriptorium, Brother Theron had already lit a few small lamps to combat the gloom of the day. The room was filled with a warm, pool of light atmosphere that felt deeply secure and inviting. A day for the interior world, he greeted her, his smile warm. The outer light is dim, so we must cultivate the inner light. A good day for Scribe's work, I think. It is, Elara agreed, hanging her damp cloak by the door. The world feels very quiet and close today. Indeed, he said. And how did you fare in the night? The rain came. Elara thought of her dream. The rain was a welcome guest, brother. It only made the safety feel deeper. More proven. Brother Theron gave a slow, approving nod. You are learning the language of the spirit, Elara. It speaks in paradoxes. A storm proves the strength of the roof. A night proves the reliability of the dawn. And a heart that can rest in the midst of change proves the steadfastness of its God. Elara went to her desk and uncovered the vellum. The illuminated P seemed to glow with a new intensity in the soft lamplight, its colors richer, its silver more profound. It was a small sun in the gray room. She prepared her inks and her pens. Today's work was less about color and more about form, the sharp, straight lines of the I, a letter of identity, of self. But after the revelations of the last 2 days, she knew this I would not be a proud, solitary line. It would be an I that stood firmly because it was rooted in the pax that preceded it. It would be an I that could lie down in peace, because it knew it was held by a you who alone granted safety. She picked up her quill, her heart and hand perfectly aligned in the quiet confidence of the rain-soaked morning. Section 15 of 30. The I was a deceptively simple letter. A single vertical stroke, strong and unadorned. But in the art of illumination, no letter was truly simple. Its placement on the page, its thickness, its relationship to the flourishing P next to it, all carried meaning. As Elara sharpened her quill, she contemplated this. The I represented the self, the individual soul that chooses to lie down, to sleep, to trust. It was a letter of will, of decision. The piece of the P was the environment, but the I was the one who had to choose to enter into it. She dipped her quill into the dark, oak gall ink and began to draw the 2 fine, parallel lines that would form the sides of the letter. Her hand was steady. This was not the fluid, organic motion of painting a vine, but the precise architectural work of building a pillar. She focused on making the lines perfectly straight, the spacing between them perfectly even. This was the discipline of peace, the daily, willful choice to align one's life with the truth of God's safety. It was a conscious act, a standing firm in faith. As she worked on the stark, black form of the I, her mind wandered back to the people of Atheria, each an I resting in the collective pax of the village and the ultimate pax of God. She thought of Liam, choosing every day to lead his flock to good pastures, a decision of trust in the land and the sky. She thought of old Maeve, choosing the colors for her threads, a decision of trust in her craft and its beauty. She thought of Brother Theron, choosing to spend his life preserving words of truth, a decision of trust in their enduring power. Each of them, in their own way, was an I that had decided to lie down in the peace provided. Her own I had made a decision last night. It had decided to trust that the rain was a blessing, not a curse. It had decided to see the gray dawn as a different kind of beauty. It had decided to believe that the safety that held her in starlight also held her in cloud cover. This was the ongoing work of the soul, not a one-time event, but a series of tiny, daily, moment-by-moment decisions to trust, to release, to lie down. She finished the main body of the I and began to add the small, serifed feet and head to the letter, giving it a graceful, anchored feel. She would not illuminate this letter with color as she had the P. Its power was in its simplicity, its stark declaration. It would be a strong, black pillar next to the vibrant, flowing garden of the P. The two would exist in a beautiful complementary tension, the given peace and the will that receives it, the grace and the faith. Brother Theron came over to see her progress. He looked at the strong, confident I taking shape next to the peaceful P. "Ah," he said softly, "the response. God says pax, and the soul says I. A beautiful conversation. So often we want it the other way around. We want our I to be strong enough to manufacture the pax. We strive and struggle and then wonder why we are so tired, why we cannot sleep. But the order of the verse is divine. First, the peace is offered. Then the I lies down in it. You have captured that order perfectly on the page." Elara looked at the 2 letters side by side. Pax I, peace I. It was the beginning of the declaration. The environment was established, and now the self was speaking from within that environment. The I was not shouting from a place of anxiety or pride. It was speaking softly, confidently, from a place of already established rest. The work of the day, the precise, disciplined drawing of this simple letter, felt like an act of worship. She was not just copying text. She was inscribing the very structure of a faithful life onto the page, one straight, true line at a time. The rain continued its gentle patter on the scriptorium roof, a constant, soothing reminder of the all-weather, ever-present grace that made such a life not only possible, but joyfully inevitable. Section 16 of 30. The rhythm of the days began to weave itself into a tapestry of quiet purpose. The mornings were for the crisp, architectural work of the letters, the afternoons for the more fluid and meditative tasks of preparation. Grinding pigments, mixing inks, stretching new vellum. Elara found a deep, sustaining joy in this rhythm. It was a life lived in harmony with the natural light, with the needs of the body, and with the demands of the spirit. Each evening, she walked the path home, her satchel a little lighter, her soul a little fuller. Each night, she practiced the sacred surrender of sleep, and each morning, she awoke with the feeling of being gently, but firmly, called back into the world of light and labor. The phrase on the vellum grew, letter by careful letter. After the I, she formed the N, a humble, connecting letter that completed the word in. It was a letter that bowed, that made itself a bridge between the towering I and what was to come. It was a letter of posture, of humility, of moving from the self into an action, a state of being. In peace, the self was now positioned within the reality of peace. It was no longer an abstract concept outside of her, but the very atmosphere she inhabited. Brother Theron watched her progress with a quiet, paternal pride. He offered guidance sparingly, knowing that the most important lessons were those she was learning not from him, but from the work itself and the quiet of her own heart. He would sometimes point out a historical style for a ligature or a traditional color for a border, but he never dictated. His greatest gift to her was the space to discover her own relationship with the text, to let the words illuminate her even as she illuminated them. One such afternoon, as a soft golden light filled the scriptorium, he brought her a small, worn book bound in plain leather. "This is not a text for copying," he said, placing it gently on the corner of her desk. "This is a collection of thoughts from scribes who have come before you. Their hands are dust, but their spirits whisper from these pages. You may find companionship here." Elara wiped her hands carefully and opened the book. The script inside was varied. Some hands were bold and confident, others fine and trembling with age. They were not formal treatises, but marginalia, personal notes, prayers, and frustrations. On one page, a scribe from a century past had written, "Today my hand shakes, the lines are crooked. I offer my trembling to him who steadies the mountains." On another, a different hand had scrawled, "The blue today is the exact color of the sky after a summer storm. I mix it with gratitude." And another, "I am tired, the work is long, but the psalm says, he gives to his beloved sleep. I claim that promise tonight." Tears pricked at the corners of Elara's eyes. She was not alone. She was part of a great, unbroken chain of men and women who had sat in rooms like this, their backs aching, their eyes straining, their hearts yearning to make visible the invisible. They, too, had known days of doubt and days of grace. They, too, had struggled to translate the peace of God from the silence of their souls onto the demanding surface of the page. Their shared humanity, their shared faith, reached across the centuries and wrapped around her like a warm cloak. She felt a profound sense of belonging to this communion of saints, this fellowship of the quiet and the diligent. She looked up at Brother Theron. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It is a great comfort. We are all scribes," he said softly, "some with ink and vellum, others with the choices of their lives. We are all trying to write the truth of God's love onto the world, in our own imperfect hand. And we all need to be reminded that we are not the first, nor will we be the last, to try." Elara returned to her work with a renewed sense of purpose. The N she was drawing was no longer just a letter. It was a connection to every and ever drawn by every faithful scribe who had ever lived. She was adding her own small, unique stitch to a tapestry of testimony that was vast beyond imagining. The weight of the task felt not burdensome, but holy. She picked up her quill, her hand now feeling guided not only by her own skill and the peace in her heart, but by the gentle, encouraging pressure of all those who had gone before. Section 17 of 30. The following day brought a different kind of lesson. A rider from a distant village arrived at the scriptorium, his clothes dusty and his face etched with a fatigue that was more than physical. He brought a message for Brother Theron, but also news from the wider world. He spoke of tensions between lords, of rumors of bandits on the lesser-traveled roads, of a sickness that had taken a handful of children in a town a week's journey away. The news was not catastrophic, but it was a tremor, a ripple of instability that reached even into the quiet sanctuary of Atheria. The rider left, and a palpable unease settled in the scriptorium. It was not fear, exactly, but a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like a cloud passing before the sun. Brother Theron was quiet, his brow furrowed in thought. Elara found her own concentration fractured. The strong, straight lines of the next word, peace, which she was to write in a simpler script, wavered. Her hand felt less sure. The news had introduced a variable that the controlled environment of her work could not account for. She laid down her quill, frustrated. The peace she had so carefully cultivated and translated onto the vellum felt suddenly fragile, theoretical. How could she write about dwelling in safety when there was genuine danger in the world? How could she illustrate a peace that could be so easily disrupted by a few words from a stranger? "Your lines are hesitant," Brother Theron observed, coming to stand beside her. His voice was gentle, without reproach. "The news?" Elara began, gesturing vaguely towards the door where the rider had departed. "It makes it all feel foolish, like we are children drawing pictures while a storm gathers outside." "Ah," Theron said, a knowing look in his eyes. "The test. It always comes. We can believe in peace when the sun is shining and the lambs are bleating. But the truth of our faith is proven when the clouds gather and we hear the wolf howl in the distance." He pointed to the word she was attempting to write. "Peace. You think it is a condition of the world. It is not. It is a condition of the soul granted by God that exists irrespective of the world's condition." The verse does not say, "I will lie down and sleep when the world is at peace." It says, "In peace I will lie down and sleep." The peace is the context for the action, not the result of the circumstances. He paused, letting the words sink in. The writer brought news of trouble. He did not bring the trouble itself. And even if he had, even if trouble stood at our gate, the promise remains. "You alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety." Not "you keep trouble from ever arising," but "you make me dwell in safety in the very midst of it." That is the deeper magic. That is the unshakable foundation. Elara looked down at her wavering lines. She saw her own fear in them. She took a deep breath, consciously releasing the tension the news had brought. She thought of the I she had drawn, the self that chooses. She could choose to be governed by the rumors, or she could choose to be governed by the promise. She could let the fear make her lines crooked, or she could let faith steady her hand. She picked up her scraping knife and carefully smoothed the vellum, erasing the hesitant strokes. It was an act of defiance. She was scraping away not just imperfect ink, but the intrusion of a fear that had no authority over her soul. She picked up her quill again, dipped it firmly in the ink, and began anew. This time, the lines were strong. They were not ignorant of the world's pain, but they were not. They were drawn from a place of chosen trust, a peace that was not naive, but victorious. The word peace took form on the page, not as a fragile wish, but as a bold declaration. It was, she realized, the most powerful response she could possibly make to the troubles of the world. Section 18 of 30. The encounter with the writer's news left a permanent mark on Elara's understanding, deepening it in a way that only struggle can. The peace she now sought to depict was no longer the simple, untroubled peace of a quiet village. It was the robust, resilient peace that could look reality in the face and still choose to lie down and sleep. This was the peace of the psalmist, who often wrote from places of danger and distress. It was a peace that had been tested and had held firm. This new understanding began to inform her craft in subtle ways. As she worked on the rest of the verse, "I will lie down and sleep," her letters took on a greater weight, a more grounded quality. She found herself adding tiny, almost imperceptible flourishes of strength to the serifs, as if rooting each word more deeply into the vellum. The work was no longer just beautiful. It was strong. It had a backbone. She thought often of the scribes in the little book, of their tremors and their tiredness. They had not waited for perfect conditions to do their work. They had done it in the midst of their own fears and limitations, offering their imperfections as part of their worship. This was the essence of faith, to act on the truth of God's character despite the evidence of one's circumstances, and to watch the evidence eventually change to reflect that higher truth. Her evenings became a dedicated practice in this kind of faith. As she performed her rituals, lighting the fire, preparing her meal, brushing her hair, she would consciously offer up any lingering anxieties from the day. The memory of the writer's words would sometimes surface, and with it, a flicker of unease. When it did, she would meet it with the verse, "In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety." She was not reciting it to make the fear go away by magic. She was reciting it to align her mind with what she knew to be eternally true, regardless of her fleeting feelings. It was a spiritual discipline, a reorientation of her soul's compass towards the true north of God's promise. One evening, as she sat on her stone bench watching the stars emerge, she practiced a new form of prayer. Instead of listing her concerns, she simply imagined placing them, one by one, into the hands of God. She imagined her worry about the wider world's troubles as a heavy, dark stone, and she visualized laying it down at the foot of the great, loving presence that filled the universe. She felt a tangible lightening in her spirit. The worry did not disappear, but its power over her did. It was no longer her burden to carry. It was now in hands infinitely more capable than her own. This was the practical outworking of the "you alone." It was the daily, hourly choice to transfer the weight of her cares from her own frail shoulders to the strong shoulders of the divine. It was the ultimate logic of peace. If the Lord alone was the source of her safety, then He alone was also the manager of everything that threatened that safety. Her job was not to manage the world, but to trust the manager. Her job was to lie down, to sleep, to rest in the sublime and liberating truth that she was not in control, and that she did not need to be. Walking back to her cottage that night, she felt a joy that was entirely new. It was a joy that had been seasoned with the acknowledgement of sorrow, a peace that had been fortified by the presence of fear. It was deeper, richer, and more valuable than the untroubled serenity of her first few days on this journey. She had faced a test, and her faith had not crumbled. It had been tempered, made stronger. She knew now that the path of peace was not a path around the valley of the shadow, but a path straight through it, with the shepherd as her guide. And because he was with her, she could fear no evil. She could, in the very midst of the shadow, lie down in green pastures and sleep. Section 19 of 30. The final word of the verse was safety, custodia in the ancient tongue. It was a word of protection, of vigilant watchfulness, of secure enclosure. As Elara prepared to illuminate it, she knew this was the culmination of all she had learned. The entire verse was a logical chain. The soul lies down in peace because it is granted safety by the Lord alone. The safety was the cause. The peace was the effect. This final word had to bear the weight of that foundational truth. She decided to illuminate the sea of custodia not with a vine or a flower, but with something that spoke of steadfast guardianship. She spent a morning simply walking the perimeter of Atheria, observing the symbols of safety that were already present. She walked along the old, low stone wall that marked the village boundary, not a fortification against armies, but a clear statement of home, a line between the domestic and the wild. She saw the ancient, gnarled thorn tree that stood sentinel on the eastern hill, its branches a tangled, protective web against the sky. She watched Bran the sheepdog as he circled the flock, his movements not frantic, but purposeful and calm, his very presence a deterrent to harm. These were all images of a protective strength that was active, watchful, and present. But how to capture the essence of the you alone? How to show that these tangible things were merely reflections of a divine reality? She returned to the scriptorium, her mind buzzing with ideas. She began to sketch. The sea would be formed from the trunk of the ancient thorn tree, its bark textured and strong. But woven within the thorns, she would place symbols of the village's trust. A tiny, sleeping lamb nestled in the curve of the letter, perfectly safe. A sheaf of wheat, representing provision. A small, lighted candle in a window, symbolizing the hope and warmth of a home held in God's care. The central image, however, the one that would occupy the enclosed space of the sea, would be the most important. She pondered this for a long time. She thought of the locked door, the strong walls, the watchful shepherd. But these were still the gifts, not the giver. Then she remembered her dream, the feeling of being the leaf on the water, perfectly supported by a law of the universe. She remembered the vast, starry sky that held her small cottage in its embrace. And then she knew, inside the sea, she would paint a landscape, but it would not be a landscape of Atheria. It would be a view from a great height, as if seen from the eyes of God himself. In the center of the enclosed space would be a tiny, perfect depiction of her own cottage, its light a single, brave pinprick in the vastness. And around it, cradling it, would be a pair of immense, cupped hands, etched so lightly into the background they would be almost subliminal, more felt than seen. They would be the color of the sky at twilight, of the stone of the mountains, of the deep earth. They would be the ultimate enclosure, the ultimate safety. The hands would not be gripping or clutching, but open, supportive, allowing the cottage its freedom and its life, while providing an unbreachable boundary of love and power. It was an ambitious plan, requiring the most delicate touch she had ever attempted. She felt a thrill of holy fear. This was not just illumination. This was theology in pigment and gold. She would be making the invisible visible. She would be depicting the divine you, that was the source of all safety. She began with a sense of awe, praying that her hand would be steady and her heart pure, that she might be a worthy channel for such a profound mystery. She mixed her paints, her prayers rising with the pigment dust in the sunbeams. She was no longer just a scribe copying words. She was a prophetess illustrating a promise. Section 20 of 30. The work on the Sea of Custodia became the most focused, intense period of Elara's life. The world outside the scriptorium, the weather, the comings and goings of the villagers, even her own hunger and thirst, faded into a distant hum. She existed for the page. She would begin at first light, her mind and hand fresh, and work until the failing light made it impossible to continue. Brother Theron ensured she ate and drank, placing food and water silently beside her, a guardian of the guardian scribe. She built the letter from the bottom up, first laying in the dark, strong lines of the thorn tree trunk. She used deep browns and blacks, but with hints of umber and sienna to suggest the life that pulsed within the ancient wood. The thorns were not painted as vicious, but as sharp, clear statements of boundary and protection, each one tipped with a tiny dot of silver, making them seem like crystalline structures forged for a purpose. Next came the symbols within the thorns. The sleeping lamb was a miniature masterpiece of trust, its tiny form rendered in the softest white, its head pillowed on its own woolly flank. The sheaf of wheat was a burst of gold, each grain a tiny, meticulous stroke of yellow ochre. The candle in the window was the most challenging of the small details. She used a minuscule dab of the purest, most translucent yellow, surrounded by a halo of carefully graded oranges and reds to suggest its warm, welcoming glow. These were the fruits of safety, the rest, the provision, the hope that flourished within the enclosure of God's care. Finally, it was time for the central image, the heart of the illumination. She prepared a very thin wash, a mix of ultramarine and a touch of umber, to create a color that was both of the sky and of the earth. With the finest brush she possessed, its point a single sable hair, she began to sketch the outlines of the cupped hands. She did not draw hard lines. She suggested them, using the barest whisper of pigment, letting the forms emerge from the vellum itself. They were vast, gentle, and powerful, their lines echoing the curve of the sea itself, as if the letter were merely a human-made symbol for this divine reality. Inside the cradle of the hands, she painted the landscape. It was a view of rolling hills and a tiny cluster of cottages that was unmistakably Atheria, seen from a great, loving height. She painted her own cottage with particular care, its thatched roof a tiny texture of strokes, its window a single point of the same warm yellow she had used for the candle. It was a mere speck in the vastness, and yet, it was the focal point of the entire composition. It was held, it was known, it was loved. She worked with her breath held, her entire being poured into the point of her brush. This was not craftsmanship. It was intercession. It was worship. She felt as though she were not creating an image, but acknowledging a reality that had always been true. She was simply making it visible for a moment, for her own eyes and for the eyes of whoever would someday behold this page. When she finally laid down her brush, the light was almost gone. The scriptorium was deep in shadow. She had been working for over 12 hours without a conscious break. Her body was a constellation of aches, her eyes gritty with fatigue, but her spirit was soaring, light and clear and full of a joy so profound it was almost painful. She looked at the finished sea. The hands were there, a barely there suggestion, yet their presence was undeniable, filling the space with a palpable sense of security. The tiny, lighted cottage dwelt in perfect safety within them. Brother Theron came and stood beside her. He did not look at the page immediately. He looked at her face, illuminated by the single lamp he carried. He saw the exhaustion and the exaltation warring in her features. Then he looked down at the vellum. He was silent for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was a hushed, reverent whisper. "You have seen," he said, "and you have shown. This is no longer an illumination, child. This is a vision." Elara could not speak. She could only nod, tears of overwhelming gratitude finally spilling down her cheeks. She had reached the end of her own understanding and had found, waiting for her, an ocean of grace. The verse was complete. The journey was complete. And yet she knew it was also just beginning. For the rest of her life, she would lie down and sleep in the truth she had just painted. "In peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety." It was no longer a verse on a page. It was the story of her soul. Section 21 of 30. The final stroke on the Sea of Custodia was not an end, but a beginning. A profound silence filled the scriptorium, a silence that was not empty but full, heavy with the weight of glory that had just settled onto the vellum. Elara's hand, which had been an instrument of such focused precision, now trembled with a sudden, overwhelming release of tension. She carefully, reverently, laid down her brush on the rest, her fingers stiff and aching. She felt as if she had just returned from a long journey to a distant, holy land, and her soul was still catching up with her body. For a long time, she simply sat, her gaze locked on the completed illumination. The entire verse was now before her. "In pace in idipsum dormiam iti requiescam." In peace I will lie down and sleep, and I will rest. The journey from the first outlined P to this culminating C was a narrative in itself. It was the story of a soul moving from questioning to understanding, from striving to receiving, from a theoretical piece to an embodied one. The letters were no longer mere words. They were a landscape her spirit had traversed. Fatigue washed over her in a great warm wave, a fatigue that was soul-deep and strangely pleasant. It was the fatigue of a farmer after the harvest, a builder after raising the final beam. It was a holy exhaustion. She had poured the very essence of her recent life, her struggles, her dreams, her prayers, her hard-won trust, into this small rectangle of prepared skin. She felt both emptied and filled to overflowing. The quiet of the scriptorium was a balm. The dust motes dancing in the late afternoon sun seemed to be celebrating. The world had held its breath with her, and now it could exhale. Brother Theron did not speak. He had witnessed the final moments from his desk, sensing the sacredness of the act. He now rose and came to her, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that matched the mood of the room. He stood beside her, not looking at the vellum immediately, but looking at her. He saw the tracks of tears on her cheeks, the slight tremble in her shoulders, the awe in her eyes. He placed a gentle, gnarled hand on her shoulder, a silent communication of shared understanding, of paternal pride, of spiritual kinship. It was a touch that said, "I know. I have been there. You have done well." Only after this silent blessing did he allow his gaze to fall upon the finished work. Section 22 of 30. Brother Theron's examination of the page was a meditation in itself. His eyes, old but keen, did not scan or flit. They wandered, they lingered, they drank. He began with the P, taking in the tranquil blues and vibrant greens, the silver that seemed to hold its own light. He nodded slowly, appreciating the foundation of peace that had been so lovingly established. His gaze then moved to the strong, declarative I, the connecting N, and the boldly scripted peace. He could see the confidence in the lines, the evidence of a faith that had been tested and had emerged stronger. Finally, his attention came to rest on the C of Custodia. He leaned in closer, his breath catching slightly. He saw the thorn tree trunk, the sleeping lamb, the sheaf of wheat, the candle's glow. A soft smile touched his lips, but when his eyes discerned the vast, gently suggested cupped hands and the tiny, lighted cottage nestled within them, he grew utterly still. The silence in the room deepened, becoming a vessel for unspoken prayer. After a long, suspended moment, he straightened up. His eyes were glistening. He looked from the page to Elara, his expression one of profound reverence. "You have not just illuminated a text, Elara," he said, his voice hushed and thick with emotion. "You have made the invisible visible. You have given form to the formless. This," he gestured to the sea, "this is a theophany, a showing of God. Many can copy the words you alone. Lord, make me dwell in safety. But you have shown us the you. You have shown us the alone. You have shown us the dwelling. This page is no longer vellum and pigment. It is a window." Elara felt his words sink into her, a confirmation of what her spirit already knew. She had not created this from her own imagination alone. She had channeled a truth that was greater than herself. She had been a witness, and now she was a testifier. "I do not feel like its creator, brother," she whispered. "I feel like its first viewer. I feel as though I simply saw what was already true, and did my best to record it." "That," said Theron, his smile widening, "is the definition of a prophet and an artist. They are not makers of new things, but seers of the true reality that undergirds all things. You have seen, child, and you have given the rest of us a glimpse. This page will be a sanctuary for centuries to come. Weary eyes will look upon it and know, in their bones, that they are held, that they are safe. You have painted the ultimate lullaby for the soul." Section 23 of 30. As the initial intensity of the completion subsided, a gentle, celebratory calm settled over them. Brother Theron insisted that the moment be properly honored. He went to a small, locked cabinet and brought out a small bottle of dark, honeyed wine and 2 small clay cups. It was a rare vintage, saved for the most significant of occasions, the completion of a great work, a holy day, a marriage. Pouring a small measure into each cup, he handed one to Elara. "We do not celebrate the product alone," he said, raising his cup. "We celebrate the process. We celebrate the journey of the soul that made it. We celebrate the grace that sustained the artist. And we give thanks for the truth that allowed itself to be depicted. To the work, the worker, and the source of all work. To the work, the worker, and the source," Elara repeated softly, touching her cup to his. The wine was sweet and complex on her tongue, a fitting taste for such a moment. It was a taste of culmination, of ripeness, of joy. They sat together as the sun finished its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. They spoke not of technique or theology, but of simple things. Brother Theron shared stories of other scribes from the village's history, of funny mistakes and moments of unexpected brilliance. Elara found herself laughing, the sound light and free in the quiet room. The immense spiritual weight of the last hours was being integrated into the ordinary, beautiful fabric of human relationship and shared memory. This, too, was part of the peace. It was not a state of constant, solemn awe, but a reality that could hold both the sublime and the simple, the profound and the playful. The God whose hands cupped the universe also delighted in the taste of honeyed wine and the sound of shared laughter. The safety he granted was a safety in which one could truly relax, could let down one's guard, could simply be. As twilight fell, Elara knew it was time to go. She carefully covered the vellum with its linen cloth, a final, tender gesture. It needed to rest, and so did she. The object was complete, but the work it represented, the lifelong practice of lying down in trust, was just beginning. She felt a quiet excitement for the countless nights ahead, each one an opportunity to live out the truth she had so painstakingly painted. She said goodnight to Brother Theron, her heart full of gratitude for his guidance and his friendship. Stepping out into the cool evening air, she felt not like an artist returning from her studio, but like a pilgrim returning from a shrine, carrying a blessing that would illuminate not just a page, but her entire life. Section 24 of 30. The walk home was unlike any other. Elara moved through the familiar landscape as if seeing it for the first time, or perhaps, for the first time seeing it as it truly was. The great oak trees were no longer just trees. They were fellow creatures, also held in the same cupped hands, their roots drinking from the deep safety of the earth. The stars beginning to prick the twilight sky were not distant, cold fires, but the gentle, watchful eyes of the same love that held her cottage. The very path beneath her feet felt solid, trustworthy, a part of the granted safety. She felt a new, intimate connection to her cottage as it came into view. It was no longer just a building she owned and maintained. It was the tiny, lighted dwelling in the palm of God. Her care for it, sweeping its floor, mending its thatch, lighting its fire, was a form of cooperation with the divine safety. It was her way of tending the gift she had been given. When she unlatched the door and stepped inside, it was with the feeling of entering a sacred space, a physical echo of the spiritual reality she had depicted. Her evening rituals were infused with a new layer of meaning. Building the fire was not just about warmth. It was about welcoming the presence of God, the consuming fire that does not destroy but purifies and comforts. Preparing her simple meal was a Eucharist, a thanksgiving for daily bread provided by the hand that holds the world. As she brushed her hair, she thought of the woman in the Gospels who washed Jesus' feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. It was an act of humble, loving preparation for an audience with the divine. She did not feel alone. The cottage was filled with a palpable, loving presence. It was the presence she had painted. The vast, gentle, encompassing hands were not just an image on a page. They were the reality of this room, of this moment. The peace was so thick she felt she could almost lean against it. There was no need to strive for it, to grasp for it, to plead for it. It was simply, abundantly there. It was the given context of her existence. When she finally lay down in her bed, the feeling was one of utter, complete surrender. It was not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of perfect trust, like a child finally giving up the struggle to stay awake and allowing themselves to be carried into sleep by a parent they trust completely. She looked at the darkened rafters, faintly visible in the glow of the dying fire, and she smiled. She was home in the most profound sense of the word. She was in her cottage, in her village, on the earth, in the universe, and all of it was held, and all of it was safe. She closed her eyes, and without any effort, without any conscious decision, she slipped into a deep, dreamless, and perfectly peaceful sleep. Section 25 of 30. That night, Elara's sleep was the purest embodiment of the psalm she had illuminated. It was not just a cessation of wakefulness. It was a positive state of rest, a journey into the heart of the divine safety. Her body, mind, and spirit, having been fully engaged in the act of creation, now entered into a state of profound receptivity and repair. There were no dreams, no fragments of the day, no tossing or turning. It was a dark, sweet, silent ocean of rest, and she floated upon it, perfectly supported. Her breathing was slow and deep, syncing with the rhythm of the night. Her heart beat its steady, reliable rhythm, a tiny drum echoing the great, steady heartbeat of God. In this state of deep rest, the final barriers between her will and God's will, between her understanding and God's truth, seemed to dissolve. The lesson of the illumination was being sealed into the very core of her being, past the level of thought or emotion, into the realm of instinct and essence. She was not simply a person who believed she was safe. In the unguarded state of sleep, she was safety because she was one with the source of safety. The you alone and the I were, for these holy hours, in perfect union. She was the leaf on the water, not as a metaphor, but as a lived reality. She was the lamb sleeping in the curve of the thorn tree sea. She was the light in the window of the cottage nestled in the cupped hands. Outside, the world continued its silent watch. The moon rose and set. A soft wind rustled the leaves, a sound like the gentle breath of the spirit. The creatures of the night went about their purposes, all under the same canopy of care. In the scriptorium, the covered vellum rested in the darkness, a sleeping giant of spiritual power, waiting for the dawn to reveal its glory once more. In the village, every soul in their own way was held in the same embrace. Liam slept, trusting his flock to the dog and his dog to God. Old Maeve slept, her hands, which wove beauty by day, now still in repose. Brother Theron slept, his faith as simple and solid as his breathing. And Elara slept. She slept a sleep that was a form of worship, a testament more eloquent than any words she could ever write or paint. It was the goal and the proof of the entire journey. In peace I will lie down and sleep. She had lain down. She was at peace, and she was sleeping in the absolute, unshakable, and loving safety of the Lord alone. The night was not a void to be feared, but a sanctuary to be entered, and she dwelt within it, perfectly, holy, and joyfully at rest. Section 26 of 30. The completion of the illuminated psalm verse was not an end, but a quiet culmination, like a river finally meeting the sea. For several days, Elara did no new work. She would simply sit at her desk in the scriptorium, the finished vellum before her, and gaze upon it. She traced the journey with her eyes, from the peaceful, flourishing P to the strong, declarative I, through the connecting E, and into the boldly scripted peace, all leading to the profound visual prayer of the sea in safety. The entire phrase was a map of her own spiritual awakening, a topography of grace written in ink and color. Brother Theron allowed her this time of quiet contemplation. He understood that the artist must sometimes separate from their creation, not to critique it, but to absorb its meaning, to let the spirit of the work settle back into the soul from whence it came. He would bring her tea and sit with her in a comfortable silence, the two of them simply being in the presence of the beauty and truth that had been birthed in their midst. "It is a strange feeling, brother," Elara said one such afternoon, her voice soft in the sun-filled room. "It feels as though I have given birth to something, and yet, I also feel as though I am the one who has been born anew." "That is the secret of all true offering," Theron replied, sipping his tea. "In the act of giving our deepest gifts, we ourselves are remade. We think we are pouring ourselves out, and we find we are being filled from a source that never runs dry. You gave your skill, your time, your questions, your struggles, and in return, you have received an answer that will sustain you for a lifetime." Elara nodded. The verse was now woven into the very fabric of her being. It was no longer just a comforting thought for the night. It was the operating principle of her entire life. She saw it in the way she now approached a minor frustration, a moment of uncertainty, or even a simple task like drawing water from the well. There was a new underlying calm, a default setting of trust that had been installed in her soul. The peace was no longer a state she had to achieve. It was the ground upon which she stood. She thought of the tiny, lighted cottage nestled in the cupped hands of her illumination. That was her. That was her soul. No matter what storms might brew in the sky of her life, no matter what shadows might lengthen across the landscape, the fundamental, unchangeable reality was that she was held. She was safe. This knowledge did not make her passive or naive. It made her courageously, vibrantly alive. It freed her from the exhausting work of being her own guardian and allowed her to pour her energy into love, into creativity, into the simple, profound joy of being. After a week of this quiet integration, she carefully covered the vellum with its protective linen cloth. It was ready to be sewn into the book, to take its place among the other psalms. But its work in her was complete. She cleaned her desk thoroughly, putting away the specific pigments and brushes she had used for this great work. She felt a sense of closure, but it was a peaceful closure, like the satisfying final note of a hymn. She was ready for the next thing, whatever it might be, because she knew she would not face it alone. She would face it from within the unshakable safety of the cupped hands. Section 27 of 30. The rhythm of life in Atheria continued, but for Elara, it was now a rhythm seen through a transformed lens. The harvest season began, and the village was abuzz with a different kind of energy. The air was filled with the sweet, dusty scent of ripe grain and the sound of scythes swishing through the fields. The days were still long and warm, but the evenings carried the first, faint crispness of the approaching autumn. Elara joined the villagers in the fields, not as a scribe, but as a member of the community. Her task was to gather and bind the sheaves of wheat. The work was physical, demanding, and left her muscles aching and her skin glowing. But she found a deep, primal satisfaction in it. It was a different kind of creation, a participation in the cycle of sowing and reaping, of trusting the earth and the sun and the rain to provide. As she worked, moving in unison with the others, she felt the truth of the psalm in a new way. The safety the Lord provided was not just for the night, it was for the day. It was the safety to labor without frantic anxiety about the outcome. It was the trust that the seeds sown in spring would, by a mystery of grace, become the bread on the winter table. The harvest was a tangible, annual testament to God's faithful provision. Each sheaf of wheat was a promise kept, a physical amen to the prayer for daily bread. In the evenings, the villagers would gather for a shared meal in the large clearing at the center of the village. Long tables were laden with food, fresh bread, roasted vegetables, stews made with the first of the autumn game. There was laughter and storytelling, the strum of a lute, the sound of children playing until they collapsed, sleepy-eyed, into their parents' laps. Sitting among them, Elara felt a profound sense of belonging. These were the faces of the other eyes, who had chosen to lie down in the peace of God. They were the sheep of the divine shepherd, the tiny, lighted cottages in the cupped hands of heaven. Their community was not a fortress against the world, but a living embodiment of the safety God grants. It was a safety experienced in shared labor, in shared food, in shared lives. The lock on her cottage door was one layer of safety. The love of her neighbor was another, equally important layer, both flowing from the same divine source. One night, as the harvest moon, huge and golden, rose over the hills, Liam the shepherd brought out his pipe and played a slow, haunting melody. The chatter stilled. Everyone listened, their faces turned towards the music and the moon. The tune was old, a song of the fields and the stars, of thanks for the harvest and a prayer for the winter to come. As the notes wove through the cool night air, Elara looked around at the circle of faces, illuminated by the moon and the central fire. She saw old Maeve, her head nodding in time to the music. She saw the children, finally still, their eyes wide with wonder. She saw Brother Theron, his eyes closed, a peaceful smile on his lips. In that moment, her heart felt so full it might burst. This was the peace. This was the safety. It was not the absence of trouble, but the presence of a love so vast it could hold an entire village, an entire world, in its harmonious, joyful, and utterly secure embrace. The illuminated page in the scriptorium was a beautiful icon, but this living, breathing, singing community was the reality it pointed toward. She leaned back, listening to the pipe music drift up towards the stars, and knew, with a certainty that went deeper than bone, that she was home. Section 28 of 30. As the autumn deepened, the pace of life in Atheria slowed. The harvest was in, the larders were full, and a sense of grateful contentment settled over the village like the soft, gray blankets of morning mist in the valley. Elara returned to the scriptorium, but her work was different now. She was tasked with the less glamorous but equally vital work of repairing older manuscripts, reinforcing bindings, and copying practical texts on herblore and agriculture. It was humble work, and she loved it. It was a reminder that the profound peace of God was meant to be lived out in the ordinary, daily tasks of life. She found that the peace she had discovered was portable. It was not confined to the scriptorium or her cottage or the harvest feast. It traveled with her. It was in her hands as she carefully mended a torn page, in her mind as she focused on forming clear, legible letters, in her spirit as she walked through the now bare fields under a sky the color of wool. The verse was a constant, gentle murmur in her heart, the background music to her life. In peace, I will lie down and sleep, for you alone. One afternoon, a young mother from the village came to the scriptorium, her face drawn with worry. Her infant son was teething and had not slept properly for nights, and her own exhaustion was etched deeply around her eyes. She had come to seek a prayer from Brother Theron, but he was away tending to a sick elder. Seeing the woman's distress, Elara put down her work. She did not offer advice or empty platitudes. Instead, she simply led the woman to a quiet corner and sat with her. She listened as the mother poured out her fears and fatigue. When the woman was done, Elara said softly, "Would you like to see something that brings me comfort?" She went to her desk and, with the woman's permission, uncovered the illuminated psalm. She did not explain the theology or the artistry. She simply let the page speak for itself. The young mother's tired eyes wandered over the letters, from the peaceful P to the strong I, and finally to the C with the tiny cottage in the cupped hands. She stared at it for a long time, and Elara saw the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. "It looks safe," the woman whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "The little house, it's like my house, and it's being held." "It is," Elara said gently, "and so are you, and so is your son, even in the sleepless nights, especially in the sleepless nights." The woman looked at Elara, and a fragile, hopeful smile broke through her weariness. It was not a magic cure for a teething baby, but it was a moment of shared grace, a reminder of the larger reality in which their small struggles were held. The illuminated page had done its work again, offering a sanctuary to another weary soul. Elara understood then that her work would never really be finished. Its purpose was to be shared, to be a quiet testament that would ripple out from the scriptorium into the lives of all who were willing to see. Section 29 of 30. Winter arrived in Atheria, not with a violent storm, but with a gradual silencing. The first snow fell in the night, a soft, hushed blanket that muted the world. Elara awoke to a light of a different quality. A pure, white radiance reflected from the ground that filled her cottage with a serene glow. The world outside her window was transformed into a monochrome masterpiece of white and shadow, of laden branches and smooth, unbroken drifts. The silence was profound, a deep, listening quiet. She dressed in warm woolens and stepped outside. The air was crisp and cold, scented with frost and pine. Her breath plumed before her. The familiar path to the scriptorium was a pristine, white ribbon, and her boots made the first marks upon it, a satisfying crunch with each step. The village was quieter, smoke rising straight and tall from the chimneys into the windless air. It was a world at rest, a season of hibernation and inward turning. The scriptorium was cold, the stone walls holding the night's chill. But soon, a small fire in the hearth and the heat from the lamps pushed back the cold, creating a warm, intimate cave of light against the white world outside. Brother Theron was already there, wrapped in a thick cloak, his hands curled around a warm cup. They worked in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire, the soft scratch of their quills, and the occasional howl of the wind as it picked up later in the day. Elara found a deep resonance between the winter landscape and the peace in her soul. The snow was a blanket, covering the earth, protecting the seeds of next year's harvest, enforcing a pace of rest. It was a physical manifestation of the lying down of creation. The world was sleeping, trusting that the sun would return, that the spring would come, that the life hidden beneath the snow was safe. It was a grand, cosmic enactment of the psalm. Her own life mirrored this rhythm. The frantic energy of the harvest was past. The long, bright days of summer were a memory. This was a time for interior work, for quiet reflection, for the slow, patient crafting of things that required no rush. It was a time to dwell deeply in the safety, to let the truth of it root itself even more firmly in her heart. The winter was not a trial to be endured, but a sacrament to be experienced, a season of holy rest. As the early darkness fell, she would walk home through the twilight, the snow glowing blue in the dim light. Her cottage was a haven of warmth. The fire she had banked that morning now revived into a cheerful blaze. The winter nights were long, but she did not fear them. They were an opportunity to practice the verse in its purest form. There was nothing to do but to be, to read a little, to mend a garment, to simply sit and watch the flames dance. And then to lie down, listening to the wind sing its wild lullaby outside, and to know, with a certainty as solid as the earth beneath the snow, that she was safe. The winter, like the night, was just another form of the cupped hands, and she dwelt within them at peace. Section 30 of 30. And so, the year turned, and the rhythm continued. Elara's life became a living illustration of the psalm she had illuminated. She was known in Atheria not just as a skilled scribe, but as a woman of profound and quiet peace. People sought her out not for grand wisdom, but for her calming presence, for the way her very being seemed to testify that all was well, that every soul was held, that rest was not just a reward but a divine right. She never created another work quite like the Psalm for Illumination. It remained her masterpiece, not because it was the most technically perfect, but because it was the one through which God had most clearly spoken to her, and through her to others. It was sewn into the great Psalter of Atheria, and in the centuries to come, many a troubled heart would turn to that page and find, in the deep blue of the flowers, the strong lines of the letters, and the tiny cottage in the cupped hands, a vision of a safety that could be their own. But for Elara, the true masterpiece was her life. It was a life lived from a place of deep, unshakable trust. She continued to work, to love, to laugh, to sometimes weep, to face seasons of joy and of sorrow. But through it all, the foundation held. The peace was not always a feeling, but it was always a fact. The safety was not always visible, but it was always real. Every single night, until she was a very old woman, she would perform the same rituals. She would build her fire, prepare her simple meal, and sit in the quiet of her cottage. She would feel the day fall away from her, and then she would lie down in her bed. The memory of the illumination would often surface, the feeling of the brush in her hand, the emergence of the colors, the moment of awe when the cupped hands seemed to appear on the page as if by a miracle. And she would smile in the darkness. She had sought to understand a verse, and in doing so, she had learned to live it. The quest that had begun with a question in a sunlit scriptorium had ended not with an answer, but with a reality as present as her own breath, as close as her own heartbeat. In peace I will lie down and sleep. And so she did. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. And so he did. The story ends here, not because the peace ended, but because it became as constant and eternal as the love that granted it. It is a story that continues in the heart of every soul who, weary from the day's journey, chooses to trust, to release, and to lie down in the great, sure, and loving safety of God. May you, dear listener, know this peace. May you lie down in it. May you sleep, and may you awake to a new day, held in the very same hands. Good night.